This is going to be a short presentation outlining the human trafficking problem within China. Before starting to look at the scale of the trafficking issue in China, I will firstly outline the definition of trafficking and what it means. According to the United Nations Palermo Protocol and the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organised Crime, which aims to prevent, suppress and punish trafficking in persons, trafficking involves the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harbouring or receipt of persons by the use of force or other means of coercion, with the reason of exploitation in mind. The protocol carries on and explains that a victim is considered trafficked so long as there is exploitation involved, regardless of whether or not the person has consented to it or not. Because of this, the dominant discourse on trafficking not only has connected trafficking with sex work, but has seen voluntary sex work attached to sex trafficking. International organisations as well as governments have been seen to focus on trafficking and the various methods that can be used to prevent trafficking, protect trafficked victims as well as prosecute the perpetrators. The dimension of the trafficking problem in China. In China, the most serious form of criminal exploitation is the crime of abducting and trafficking women and children. Human trafficking, and more specifically sex trafficking, violates many human rights, such as the right to life, liberty and security of persons. Article 3 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights reflects an individual's right to life, liberty and security, which are all breached by human trafficking. This is also evident in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, where Article 6 expresses that no one shall be deprived of his life. Interestingly, up until 1949, this sort of crime was almost non-existent in China. However, it emerged in China at the beginning of the 1970s, and since the 1980s, this sort of offence has become more and more frequent. According to the US Department on State Annual Trafficking in Persons Report, domestic trafficking is the most serious problem in China, with an estimation of 10,000 to 20,000 victims trafficked internally each year for the purpose of sexual exploitation and forced labour. China is seen as a source, transit and destination country for trafficking. Trafficking occurs mainly within the borders of China, but citizens are often trafficked out of China. Causes of trafficking in China. There can be multiple causes for trafficking in China. China's social system has made trafficking very easy and almost inevitable. The most common reason for trafficking in China is for the sale of women and forced marriage, forced labour and sex work. Trafficking in China can be down to the economic situation in the remote countryside, such as villages. Reports have suggested that most trafficking happens in undeveloped areas such as these, where people hold traditional beliefs and feudal ideology. Some of the biggest reasons for trafficking people in China is due to the gender imbalance that has occurred because of the one-child policy. Trafficked women are forced into marriages in many rural areas because many men have not been able to find a wife or because they have not been able to afford one. In many rural areas, the high price of buying a wife off the original family and the wedding ceremony often exceeds the price of purchasing a wife. Forced labour is another common factor for the trafficking of people in China. Although Chinese laws prohibit forced labour, it remains a serious problem in China. Internationally, many men were deceived into forced labour from countries such as Mexico, Japan and Argentina. Internally, many children were kidnapped or abducted to be exploited and forced into labour. Moreover, sex work in China is also a reason for trafficking people. Reasons for this are vast and can be down to the limited employment opportunities found in the city and the lack of private sector jobs. As well as this, many migrants lack the social skills to find a job, which isn't helped by the government, who deny equal status to migrant urban residents. Chinese laws on trafficking. Looking at trafficking laws that are in place in China, it is clear to see that they are very weak or non-existent. China does have trafficking laws in place, but they are not very well upheld. Within China, human trafficking brings in more money than the trafficking of arms and drugs. This makes it all the more difficult to eliminate. In addition to this, prostitution is illegal within China, and so the victims that are trafficked and forced into sex work are treated as criminals rather than victims of trafficking. Because of this, many trafficked women are discouraged to find help from local authorities because of the risk of them being jailed for participating in illegal prostitution or being deported to their home countries where they were treated as outcasts. However, legalising prostitution is not going to help the situation, as it will be helping to legalise or assist trafficking for the purposes of sex work, which will make it harder to distinguish between trafficked victims and the voluntary prostitute. Moving on from this, China is currently on a Tier 2 watch list for the third consecutive year due to trafficking. China has avoided a downgrade to Tier 3 as its government has been seen to devote the appropriate resources to write a plan to limit the trafficking, in which, if it is implemented, will be sufficient enough to meet the minimum standards. In addition to this, the government has made further efforts to amend the gaps identified in the definition of trafficking-related crimes and approved a national victim identification system. All in all, the government has taken steps to implement its National Action Plan against Trafficking in Persons, which aims to address anti-trafficking law, improve interagency and international cooperation, boost anti-trafficking investigations, develop anti-trafficking awareness campaigns, and enhance victim protection services. In conclusion, it is clear to see that the human trafficking issue in China is a complex one. With human trafficking being a serious human rights violation, it is important that it gets sorted out quickly. Human trafficking in China is mainly due to the economic and feudalism in the countryside and villages. Hopefully, with the various government implications that are being set into motion, this will help eradicate some of the causes of trafficking as well as strengthen organisations to help victims and, of course, update the legal framework to criminalise all forms of trafficking. Even with all these implications, there is still a lot of work to do to fully abolish the trafficking in China. Thank you very much for listening.